Hello, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to our next webinar that we so much enjoy sharing with you. It really is a privilege to be a part of your day with what we feel is some very valuable information. And when it comes to money, that's very valuable. So, to get us started, I'm just going to introduce some folks, but first, I'm going to start with my PowerPoint. Ah, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That really is Kendall. All right. When you drive into the community, that's the sign that you see. And we're gonna be seeing these flowers very soon. Winter is over. Thank goodness. And today we have with us Kylan Johnson and Dan Ahern. So the focus for today is to bring you professionals who are highly skilled in their fields that will be giving you some wonderful financial information. Kylan is an estate attorney, and Dan is a financial advisor. These two professions go hand in hand with what Kendall's I would call it what our model is about, because our contract happens to be a financial tool. So let's see if we can't move forward and see what I mean by that. And you are going to be able to ask questions that we will happily answer. If you look towards the bottom of your screen, if you don't see this Q&A sign, just hit the little dots that say more, and the Q&A will pop up. That's where you can type your questions in while we're doing the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we're going to start to answer those questions. So feel free to type them in. You see, we have the red X on raise hand. Raise hand isn't going to be helpful here. So everything should go in your Q&A box. Okay, now this is where I get very happy. I love blending together financial planning, estate planning, and the benefits of a life plan community, because they definitely are connected. When I said earlier that a life plan community contract is a financial tool, it couldn't be more true than that. And I don't think that people see it that way. And I hope that by the end of today's conversation, it'll be very clear. The reason it's a financial tool is that you've been working with advisors, listening to people who talk about estate planning, getting all of your documents prepared, and money with placing in trust, so on and so forth. And your financial planner, who is your advisor of how to make your assets grow. And you do that your whole life, and then you retire. And then it's like, well, what do I do now? Right? Okay, I work so hard. We have all of this. Do I have enough money to retire? Well, when you're looking years ahead at the costs of long-term care, like um, skilled nursing is the biggest predator of people's assets. And unless you have a definite plan, you have no idea what that's going to cost you, because it keeps going up and up and up. I don't know if you guys have been experiencing it, but this year I see my deductibles for my insurance changing. stuff changes every year, and you're getting hit with more and more healthcare costs. So having something predictable makes a lot of sense. And how is it predictable? Well, when you're here at Kendall, the monthly service fee that you're paying to live here month to month, whatever that is at the time you may need to transition into skilled nursing, you're going to pay the same amount. It doesn't go up. So you know years ahead what kind of money you need to retire. That's what Dan and Kylan can figure out for you. When you say to them, do I have enough money to retire? And you say, I'm going to be retiring at a life plan community, they can answer that question. And that's a beautiful thing. So why does this kind of conversation matter? Because people are living longer. And we find, and I'll tell you, that's probably the biggest reason why life, like long-term care insurance, is so erratic. Because years ago the actuaries didn't predict it correctly. I know there's people that have lived here till 106. We take that as being, common these days. Where not that long ago, when someone turned 100, it was riveting. Oh my goodness, you're 100 years old, and it still is. Okay, but it's more and more common these days. So as we go through these conversations that we're going to have now, you can end up being as happy as our residents are in this picture. Look at this. In Terrytown, they have a mural where you can go take selfies of yourself. And we were with residents downtown, and we got to take this picture. And I just think that it was just a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. But they don't have any worries because they know how their money is going to be for the rest of their lives. So without waiting any longer, I'm going to turn this program over to Dan, who now is going to give you the meat and potatoes of why we're here.
Thank you for that, Lois. Let me get the screen going. All right, I think we are set. We're seeing the screen. So hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully the spring weather today is here to stay now, but glad before the afternoon turns into a nice 70-degree day, you're here with us this morning. Thank you to Lois, Carolyn, Joey, and everyone involved at the Kendall for helping make this happen today. My name is Dan Ahern, and I'm also joined here today by Kylan Johnson, whom you will hear from shortly. But before we dive in, quick background on myself. I'm a financial advisor and vice president of Rise Private Wealth Management, a private wealth management franchise of Ameriprise Financial, LLC. I work with individuals and families to provide financial simplicity, confidence, and success. You know how people worry about how they may not have enough money to live well through retirement? I help fix that. In addition to being a fiduciary, I serve on the board of the Westchester Public-Private Partnership for Aging Services. We develop resources to provide seniors the ability to age with independence and dignity in their home community. Quick fun fact about me, I grew up locally in Briarcliff Manor, and I actually proposed to my wife in Rockwood Park, right next to the Kendall. So it is a pleasure to be here speaking today. As Lois already gave us the intro on, our topic today is wealth with intention. And our purpose is to support fostering legacy conversations across generations. And I know sometimes legacy and estate planning topics can be difficult, uncomfortable, but it's wonderful to be in a position to have them. Today's discussion will focus on what people often want when it comes to wealth transfer. Specifically, we'll focus on three considerations: to be understood, to leave a legacy, and to make things easy. For many of us, these ideas are among the most important in the entire wealth journey. After a lifetime of building a legacy, many people want their wealth to make a positive impact on the people and causes that they care about the most. And that may resonate with you as well. For each consideration, we'll start with some common concerns for both legacy builders and the next generation. As you'll see, your concerns may look a little different depending on where you fall and what generation you're in. After discussing the concerns, we'll talk about the ways to meet them, and the goal of today is laying a foundation for shared understanding. So let's start with the first consideration, to be understood. That's a universal desire, but it tends to show up in different ways, especially when it comes to wealth transfer. For example, if you have accumulated wealth, you may be concerned about simply not knowing the best path forward with respect to wealth and wealth transfer. Maybe you're still figuring out what matters most to you. But maybe the intentions aren't clear, or you don't know how to put them into practice. You may also be concerned about being misinterpreted, both during and after your lifetime. Another concern I hear often is the fear of wishes not being honored, either now or later. Most people want their wishes honored without being heavy-handed. That's where shared understanding is so, so valuable. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, as a legacy builder, you may be concerned about seeming unfair. Perceived unfairness has the potential to create a conflict, another very common concern, but so could fairness itself. Say you have multiple children and there's a vacation home. One child spends years using it, taking care of it, paying for the repairs, while the other children rarely visit or contribute. In that situation, it is really most fair to leave the home to everyone in equal shares, right? Sometimes treating people exactly the same on paper doesn't reflect how things actually play out in real life. While many of these concerns start with creating a legacy, the desire to be understood is equally present for the next generation and beyond, but expressed a little bit differently. There may be concern about ambiguity, which could show up as having to guess intentions or having to figure out. There also might be concerns about interactions on the wealth transfer. Um, they want to be respectful, but you may be reluctant to fully engage in the fear of pressured conversations or discomfort, or even talking about boundaries. You can see how any of these concerns, if unaddressed, could put a damper on the positive impact of leaving a legacy. The good news is that these concerns can be solved, and the way we solve them is through alignment, which I like to call shared understanding. A pretty common theme that we're already seeing. Um, One natural step beyond today's session is really discussing intentions. This may be as simple as a Sunday afternoon conversation on the sofa, but many families find it helpful to formalize a conversation a bit more than that. And as a financial advisor, and also looking at Kylan here on the screen as an estate attorney, um, it's something that we do often and we help facilitate. Some families find it helpful to create a periodic family meeting focused on these matters as an opportunity to discuss updates to the legacy, to the estate, and then to go even deeper, establishing a trust or managing a foundation. Um, Again, myself or Kylan or any other professional could be there or serve as a third party for these conversations. Another practical step is documenting the shared values. This can be formal, such as a family mission statement, or it might be informal, as just a short list on a piece of paper that explain your wishes. And then finally, sharing the key documents, which we'll talk more about in a little bit later. But as easy as if you have those documents, make sure somebody knows where they are at least. As families build that alignment, it's important to recognize what's at stake. Wealth today is rarely just a bank account or a retirement plan. It comes in many forms, and each of it has their own planning needs. If your family has significant assets, your transfer may be more complex. For example, taxable investments, stocks, bonds, money in the bank. There might also be deferred comp, pensions involved. There's real estate, there could be family business, shared interests, or even private assets like limited partnerships, And then lastly, there's wealth in the form of jewelry, art, coins, family heirlooms, you name it, even fine wine. But for many families, particularly those with growing or significant wealth, a meaningful portion of assets may be concentrated in one or two areas, like those taxable assets, stocks, or in family business or real estate. The concentration of in any of those can create both opportunity and risk, which is why diversification and intentional planning matters so much. Moving on to the next consideration, wealth transfer is to leave a legacy. The term legacy refers to the impact you'll make on the people, causes, and communities that are important to you. Here's one to think about. As I said earlier, we're seeking shared understanding. We just talked about why that's important. Now let's talk about what that shared understanding helps bring about. Or another way, legacy is what we are trying to accomplish with the benefit of alignment. Again, a few common concerns. As legacy builders, you may worry about wealth dilution, which means that the diminishing of wealth through the generations. You may also worry about losing control or whether heirs are ready to manage wealth, something that I see more and more often. Taxes are another concern. We love those CPAs. Taxes are always top of mind for most people. These are more than just financial and strategic than the concerns we discussed previously, which makes sense because we are turning now to what can get in the way of the legacy's positive impact. For the next generation, they may also be concerned about significant tax bills and how to pay them. Sometimes forced asset sales may occur. A textbook example would be having to sell the childhood home just to pay taxes. Beyond estate sales, illiquid inheritances can also bring up some of those questions. And then finally, one that everybody wants to avoid, family disputes, which could underscore the value behind deep planning. Fortunately, thoughtful planning can help alleviate these concerns we just focused on. A good way to frame the conversation is around what's most important to you and your spouse and to loved ones. It may be some combination of that, or again, adding in communities and causes. It's likely that a mix of both categories is just right for you. So let's look at a few of these. I'm going to pull up there for just a moment, pass it over to Kylan to hear from another voice for a few, and grab a drink of water.
Thank you, Dan. So everybody, I'm Kylan Johnson. I'm the owner and attorney at Hudson Valley Estate Planning. I'm actually based in Sleepy Hollow, about a mile south of Kendall. And so I can vouch for Sleepy Hollow as a fantastic community, and I can vouch for Kendall as a fantastic community as well. I have a lot of clients that are there, spend a lot of time. I can say that the food and beverage department is particularly fantastic. And how I come to this conversation, just to give you a little bit of background on me, I became an estate planning attorney as a result of issues that my family faced with my own grandmother. So we called her Mama. She was the biggest fan in the world that I ever had, every baseball game, recital, all of that. But when I was just getting ready to graduate from undergrad, she was diagnosed with vascular dementia. And we think that she probably had it for about 2 years, but nobody in my family had ever experienced anyone with dementia. So we just missed all of the signs. And that sent my family into a mad scramble. Again, we've never dealt with this at all. It was a world in which this was like 2006. There weren't the resources that are available now. There weren't the options that are available now. And my family quickly learned kind of how expensive care is. And so to Lois's point earlier, I just want to kind of put a fine point on it. Having predictability in the cost of care, should you unfortunately get into a situation where you need skilled nursing or you need memory care, that is just unbelievably value. I can say as you know, since COVID, the cost of this type of care has at least doubled, if not more. Since my grandmother needed that memory care, it's probably gone up 400%. And we don't know where it's going to go, but I can guess it's probably not going to go down, right? And so having that stability, having that known cost of care is just so important. So let me get back onto our topic here, but really, leaving a legacy with family members in particular, there's a couple of considerations. So timing and structure, what money, in some instances, you may want to front money, right? You may want money to go out right now, depending on the age of children or other charitable causes, etc. You want to have the proper support around you as you make these decisions. So a financial advisor, an accountant, a CPA, they need to be a big part of your life as you consider a move to Kendall and as you consider different wealth transfers going forward. Preparation to manage wealth is incredibly important as well. As Dan said, we're seeing more and more a concern amongst our senior clients about whether the next generation is ready to handle the amount of wealth that is going to be transferred to them. And that if you're not confident in that there are certain guardrails you can put in place, certain professionals you can hire to help with that process. And just knowing that, again, on that purpose-driven support, knowing that that support is there and that you don't have to play a guessing game or you don't have to hope and wish that the next generation or the next generations are ready for that. And then fairness and equality is it's different for every family. What I have found in my career is that the big fights don't always happen around the big money. I have a colleague of mine whose relationship with his brother broke down for many years after their mother died because one of them thought that they were supposed to get a rug and the other one got the rug. And there was a big fight over this rug. It was a nice rug, but it wasn't, it wasn't going up in the mat or anything. But it's the little things like that people feel like I was supposed to get this. I was entitled to this. I was offered this. I had a conversation with mom or dad about this. And so fairness is not just, how do we divide assets and cut all the shares equally? Not all shares are equal. And not all emotions are equal, obviously, and that's just a big consideration to have as you consider a wealth transfer. So moving ahead here, I do want to hit on, I mentioned causes that you may care about as well. I know a lot of folks are charitably inclined, and I want to kind of hit on a couple of things around those gifts and different ways that you can structure those gifts. If you are so inclined. So you can see here kind of moving left to right, different options that are available. Obviously, a lot of people choose to make outright gifts to charities on a annual basis, maybe a one-time basis. That is sort of at that moment, the charity's getting that money. I'll talk here in a minute about sort of tax considerations around that. Another great option just for you to think about if you are so inclined is what's called a qualified charitable distribution. And it's a really bad name for saying that you can donate money out of your IRA every year up to a very high threshold under federal law. And that money can pass tax-free not only to the charity, but it can come out of your IRA tax-free as well. So no capital gains taxes due on that transaction. And then obviously you get a tax deduction for that as well. So for those of you who have significant amount of money in IRAs and 401ks, 403bs, and you're required to take required minimum distributions out of those accounts, and you want to, at the same time, you're thinking, oh, I want to make this charitable gift, keep in mind that you can use those accounts to make those charitable gifts and have major tax benefits from it and actually make your gift go further with that charity. Plan giving is something I actually help a lot of organizations here in Westchester County with their plan giving programs. There are a lot of charities out there doing great work, but as you can imagine, oftentimes underfunded. And so they're constantly looking for donors that are willing to make plan gifts, meaning They may not get those gifts today, but down the road, knowing that they're going to have future funding resources and it can help them plan for the future, for capital projects and other things. And so oftentimes this may say putting a charity in your trust or your will, or making a charity the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. Again, these are gifts that are not going to come to fruition until a later date, but charities are oftentimes looking for them. Now, you can also set up a charitable remainder trust. So this is a situation where you can place money into a trust. You can continue to get basically sort of like setting up an annuity out of that trust. But then when you pass away, whatever is left in that trust then goes to the charity, so the remainder of it. So it's a way to kind of ensure that there's still cash flow coming from those dollars, but that you have ensured that when you pass away, that those dollars will indeed go to the charity. There's no guesswork with that. And I often encourage you to let the charity know that you have set one of these up so that they can plan accordingly around that gift. And then finally, the hottest form of charitable giving these days are donor advised funds. There's a couple of organizations out there that are very prominent in this area. Basically what you do with these is you donate a certain amount of money each year to a donor advised fund. That donor advised fund then goes and invests that money, trying to grow that money. Once it's in that fund, you cannot take it out for your own purposes. It must get distributed to a charity. But then you get a chance to choose what charity or charities you want that money to go to. And that account can be perpetual. So, if you donate a significant amount of money there, you're basically leaving an investment account that is specifically earmarked for charity, and that you and eventually your heirs can have control of to determine where those dollars go. So it's a very tax efficient way. Nobody's paying capital gains tax on the growth once that money is in the account. And a lot of people like having sort of the options that are available within those funds. And so I'll quickly kind of go over here next. I'll go over some of the tax implications of those. So an outright gift, you're going to get an immediate tax deduction. Keep in mind that as of about a year ago, our tax laws changed. There are some new laws around how much you can deduct from a charitable gift. Now, there's all kinds of rules about how much money you have to be making and all of that. But the bottom line is you can get a significant tax deduction if you make a gift today. We talked about the qualified charitable distributions and the tax benefits there. Planned gifts are often used for estate tax prevention. And when you pass away, if you are subject to estate tax, whether here in New York, we have our own estate tax, there's 12 states around the country that do, and then obviously there's a federal estate tax as well. Gifts that are amounts that are left to charity are exempted from estate tax calculation. So it can bring down the value of your estate and hopefully either eliminate or significantly reduce the amount of estate taxes that are being paid. Charitable remainder trust, you are getting down the road, you're getting a tax deduction for the amount of money that's going to be earmarked for charity in that as well. And then donor advised funds, as I said, those are growing tax-free. You're making that gift. You get the deduction when you actually make the gift to the donor advised fund. And then from there, that money is growing tax-free. It's being distributed tax-free as well. So I want to talk a little bit about, we're looking at a couple here and what are their priorities. So oftentimes, this is kind of my typical client here. They're worried about efficient asset transfer, both in terms of being tax efficient, but also the items that they're trying to pass on and how best to pass those on. They do want to continue oftentimes having control of those assets to the greatest extent possible and having the ability to change things as the world changes, as their family changes, as their own situation changes, right? And oftentimes they're working with Dan and myself, as well as the CPA, to talk about how do we manage taxes, how do we preserve assets going forward. And obviously, for folks that are looking at Kendall, asset preservation is a big part of a life care contract and thinking that through, right? Because we're trying to make that money go as far as we can while still getting incredibly high level of care and incredibly high level of lifestyle, but still having something to leave to loved ones and or charity. So an efficient asset transfer, we love Venn diagrams around here. So there are different strategies that you can put in place to ensure an efficient transfer. Oftentimes that includes the use of trust. So what is a trust? A trust is basically a contract. It is saying that some property is going to be managed by some person, and it's going to be distributed to some person or people at some specific time. That is basically what a trust is. They are, because contracts are basically sacrosanct under U.S. constitutional law, trusts oftentimes are sacrosanct unless they're used for some sort of illicit purpose. And so when we're thinking about an asset transfer, we may be thinking about using trust in a way that optimizes our assets, that maximizes our lifetime giving, but also obviously leave something for people down the road, as well as how do we ensure that assets that are placed in that trust can continue to grow and continue to be valuable to the ones that we love. So this is an interesting topic here. So today, as I said, a lot of clients want to ensure that they have full control. We can do that to the extent possible, although I will say that the wealthier that you are, the greater that your estate tax burden is, the more control you may have to give up, because one of the ways to ensure that you get assets out of your taxable estate is to transfer them to an irrevocable trust, put somebody else in charge as the trustee of those funds or that property, whatever it is. You can put certain guardrails in place, obviously, but for the most part, most folks are going to be looking at, how do we maximize our control in our estate going forward. Any future things that you want to do, you do intentionally, right? So if there's been a change in circumstances with a child, or there's a new organization that you're a part of that you want to leave something to, having flexibility to alter an estate plan is obviously very important. But the key thing is that you have this kind of wrapped up and tidy in the way you want it by the time that you pass away. That is the best way to ensure that your legacy is secured, that your wishes are going to be adhered to. And what I have found in my own profession is that the more guesswork there is, the more flexibility for the next generation. That is oftentimes, unfortunately, where fights occur. And I'm sure you've seen this in your own life, as I have in mine. It is, people can think like, oh, when I pass away, if my family gets along, everything's going to be great. Unfortunately, people do stupid things over money. People blow relationships over money. People tear their family apart over money. And obviously, that's what none of us want to have happen. None of us want to be the catalyst for that occurring. So having things very well defined later in life, as you get as you get a bit clearer picture on what your expenses are going to be, what your wealth looks like, it's just incredibly, incredibly important. Moving ahead here, I will, next I want to talk a little bit more about tax management. So during lifetime, keep in mind, a lot of clients will come to me and they will say, well, why should I put this into a trust? Why don't I just give it to my son or daughter or whoever while I'm alive? And the reason for that, to not do that, or to at least think twice about doing that, is for tax considerations. So under tax law in this country, if you give something to somebody while you're alive, they get it at what's called the cost basis of whatever you obtain that property at as well. So the example I like to use is on a single family home. 40 years ago, you bought it for $100,000. And if you give, but let's say now, here we are 40 years later, it's worth $1 million. If you just sign over a deed to your daughter and say, hey, effective immediately, my daughter is now the owner of this home, she will get that home at the $100,000 tax basis that you got it at when you purchased it 40 years ago. When she holds on to it for a couple of years and then she decides to sell it. Let's say by the time she decides to sell it, it's worth 1.1 million. So she got it at 100,000. She sold it for 1.1 million. She will be determined by tax authorities as having a $1 million capital gain on that transaction. Capital gains rates are upwards 20-25%, depending on how long you've held the asset and the like, whether or not you've lived there. But the bottom line is you're talking about a six-figure tax bill as a result of making that gift to her. If instead you leave that home to her via a trust or via a will, when you pass away, she gets something called step up in basis. So, and this works, I've mentioned single family homes just because it's the easiest example, but this works as well with like investment accounts, retirement accounts as well. You get that step up in basis. So if you give it to your son or daughter when you pass away, they're going to get in the example that I was using previously. You pass away and it's worth $1 million. Your daughter would get that asset at $1 million tax level. So in 5 years, when she sells it for $1.1 million, the only taxable gain that she's had is $100,000. And so she'll owe capital gains tax on that, but it's a much smaller, we're talking about, a much smaller, in that case, 5-figure tax bill, potentially, versus a 6-figure tax bill that could be, many hundreds of thousands of dollars. So in general, kind of the big takeaway is it's much better to give something to somebody after you pass away than it is to give them in your lifetime. And obviously that's an unfortunate part of tax law, because oftentimes people would like to see somebody else getting the benefit of that property, but just know that there are major tax implications of doing that. So let's talk about estate taxes, one of my favorite topics. So federal estate tax in general, just kind of a thumbnail sketch of what it is. If you have an estate over $15 million that you're giving away when you pass away, you are subject to a tax of 40% on that, above that 15 million. If you're a married couple, it can be up to 30 million. Basically, you can double that exemption. What's not included and what's not taxable then when you pass away are amounts that go to spouses and amounts that go to charities. So what that means is that when you're considering leaving things in particular to children or to grandchildren, then you're talking about a significant amount of tax that could be due on those transactions. Oftentimes, under both federal and state estate taxes, as we're talking about, oftentimes they are sort of widow or widower taxes, that one spouse leaves everything to the other, and then that surviving spouse is sort of sitting on a tax time bomb, and is often kind of the estate that is potentially subject to estate tax. Obviously, that's an extraordinary amount of wealth that you can pass forward, but obviously there's going to be people on this call that are above that threshold. And so if that's you, you really need to do some planning around that really as soon as possible. So under the federal law, there's a 3-year look back on transfers that you make to alleviate estate taxes. So really time is always of the essence, because we never know what can happen to us. State estate taxes. So I mentioned earlier, there's 12 states that have a state estate tax. I think there's 5 states that have an inheritance tax. They're sort of, they have different names, but the upshot is that once those taxes are paid, your heirs are going to get less money. That's just the upshot of it. Every state sort of has a different threshold. Here in New York, if your estate is larger than 7.5 million, that is when the estate tax kicks in. However, if your estate, as of this year, if your estate is larger than 7.71 million, you lose all exemption completely. So from $1 to dollar last, your estate is hit with a 16% estate tax. So that threshold is about half of what the federal is if you're in New York. And, still a 16% tax. It's not quite 40, but still a 16% tax. And that's highly relevant, right? New York also has a 3-year look back on transfers that are to avoid estate taxes. And so again, time is really of the essence. Inheritance taxes, we don't have one here in New York. As I said, there's like 5 states out there that have one. But what that functions is instead of taxing like the dead person, they're taxing the people who are getting money from the dead person. And so essentially the bottom line is that if you are paying estate or inheritance taxes, your heirs are taking home less. So tax is obviously a big piece, but there's other threats to your wealth that I want you to consider. So creditors, and this can be also kind of part of this are lawsuits, disputes, but also think simple things like getting into a car accident, or somebody has a slip and fall on a property that you own. If you have commercial real estate or residential real estate that you rent out, those can be, pressure points for disputes, for lawsuits, injuries. Those have a major impact. I have great friends in the property and casualty insurance space now, and what I was told is that basically nobody sues anybody for anything less than $1 million now. That's sort of like the starting option. Doesn't mean necessarily they're going to get $1 million, but like when somebody puts in a lawsuit, there's been an injury, they're just like $1 million. That's kind of where the negotiation starts, right? So you're going to want to make sure that you are properly insured for your car, for any properties that you own. It's not expensive to get additionally umbrella coverage through a property and casualty insurer as well, to give yourself some additional protection. But if somebody sues you for something and it's a significant settlement or significant judgment, obviously that's going to eat into your assets. That's less that you have, but it's also less that is going to your heirs. And fraud's a big problem with seniors these days. Your generation defaults to truth. And so when you get a phone call from the phone company, you actually think it's a phone call from the phone company because that's how business was done way back in the day, right? You get a letter in the mail, that's how business was done. Emails that can look incredibly, it looks like Amazon's really saying that, you owe $40. It's not your fault. These scammers are very good, but you are the most vulnerable population when it comes to fraud. And that is just something to keep in mind in terms of your own, different mechanisms that you have in place. I can just say my mother is 73. She lives alone in Florida. We have a protocol in place that if she gets a phone call or she gets a letter or an email or whatever, she actually contacts me first. And I view whatever she's looking at, or I take down the phone number and I do investigative research, and I actually make sure that the people that are contacting her are indeed the people that she thinks she's actually dealing with. Putting a similar system in place may be good for you. There's also different services out there that will help with, identity theft and other things like that you can look into. But unfortunately, seniors are very very targeted is the word that I would say these days. So that's important to keep in mind on the asset protection side. So big question, as you think about your legacy, what are 3 things that are important to you? That's something that you should think about as we go through this presentation, obviously, but going forward as well, and prioritizing those things. And moving ahead here, this is where a good estate plan can really make things easy, can make things easier for you, can make things easier for your heirs as well. So for your generation, it's about, you are worried that you're creating chaos, that you've got accounts all over the place, that you've got, maybe you don't even have a will, maybe you have not appointed a power of attorney. That needs to be a major consideration for you. Burdening your heirs as well. I have a close family friend of mine. Her father passed away. He owned 6 different garages. There was an old gun collection, old cars, a gas station, etc. And his daughter really wanted nothing to do with this. And it's been like 6 or 7 years of her life now that she's been dealing with all of this. And it's just been a massive burden. She actually suffered a stroke in the process, and we think it may have been due to the burden that her father left her with this estate. Incomplete planning as well. You sort of plan up to a certain point and say, oh, I'm going to leave this other thing for another day. You never get to it. And that can be a big problem. And we talked a little bit about orphaned assets, but just, that there are things out there that, small life insurance policies that you had in an old job, or, a 401k that you had in an old job, something like that. You think, I'm not going to deal with it. I'll let somebody else deal with it down the road. That can just be a huge pain for your clients, for your heirs. And my big thing that I say to my clients is, your estate plan is sort of the last taste you leave in the mouths of your family. Do you want that to be a good taste, or do you want that to be a bad taste, right? The next generation obviously is worried about having to locate all this stuff, right? Having to coordinate with siblings and other family members, hiring professionals, hiring potentially a probate attorney or a financial advisor to sort of help figure this all out, what the tax implications are of different moves going forward. And then it's just a huge burden in terms of time. And unfortunately, what I have seen is that, one child will sort of be put in charge of everything. It's usually a child that is close in geography, and they may not be ready for it. They may not want the responsibility, and they may not be properly compensated for it as well. So that's something to keep in mind as you make your estate plan, to ensure that if you are placing a significant burden on a member of your family to sort of handle things when you pass away, that you are ensuring that they can get compensation for those significant hours that they're going to put in. So how do we get to an efficient asset transfer? The first thing is that if at all possible, we should try to avoid probate. Country's bigger than ever. More people are dying than ever. Probate times are in probate court is taking longer and longer than ever. In New York, even simple estates now, it's taking up to 2 years to get them through probate. So avoiding probate can be done by using trusts. Trusts don't have to be probated, so transferring assets into trusts, as well as ensuring simple things like if you've got a 401k or a brokerage account, a life insurance policy, fill out the beneficiary designation form. If you do that, none of those assets have to go through probate, and you have really eliminated a major burden, and you've also provided quick liquidity to your family as well in doing that. Organizing information. So whether it's a binder, a folder, putting it in a fire safe, ensuring that everybody knows how to get access to it, that is involved in the plan. Letting your heirs know, hey, I've got a life insurance policy. It's with Prudential. It's, the number, here's the policy number. Here's what the death benefit is, all that kind of stuff. Ensuring that they know as much as you can possibly give them about where your wealth situation sits and where they can go about, should a tragedy occur, where they can go about getting your estate plan and executing upon it. I think oftentimes, in the movies, there was just a new show on Netflix about the Guinness family in Ireland around the beer. And it was this big dramatic scene where the old man passes away and they go into the attorney's office and, they unseal the will, and everybody finds out at that time, what they're getting. And that is the worst possible thing you can do with estate planning. It really should not be a guessing game when mom or dad passes away. Who's getting what, who's in charge, right? So, and then finally, I'll just hit on kind of why all this is important. So having clarity, Dan mentioned that. Sense of security as well for everybody involved. Medical guidance too, healthcare proxy, living will, HIPAA waiver, that flexibility we mentioned. And then finally, time and money savings as well. Handling these things while you are alive is going to be, and you can control it, is much preferred than somebody having to figure it out after you pass away. I'll just quickly, I know we're coming up on time here, and I want to reserve time for Q&A. So an estate kind of includes all of these things here that we are on the screen. Dan mentioned a little bit of this as well. But really think through, I mentioned earlier, really think through those heirlooms and personal property. That's where I have found some of the biggest disputes happen with an estate. Mentioned some of these documents already, but you should ensure that you've got some sort of disposition document, whether it's a will, a revocable trust, irrevocable trust. It kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, meet with an estate planning attorney to discuss that. Power of attorney, really quick, really necessary. I want to hit on a couple of these documents that don't deal with when you pass away, deal with while you're alive. So power of attorney is who's going to run your financial life if you're incapacitated. And oftentimes that's a spouse as a primary and maybe a trusted child or loved one as a secondary. If you don't have a spouse anymore, or don't have a trusted person in your life, there also are professionals that you can hire to perform these services as well. Living will basically says, what do you want to have happen if you are at an end of life situation? So they've tried everything medically. They cannot get you to a place where you can live a meaningful life. What do you want to have happen to you at that time? Healthcare proxy is kind of happens before that. Is just you are temporarily incapacitated. Who's going to make medical decisions for you? So you get into a car accident, you're not full facultied. Who's going to be there at that hospital and should be talking to the doctor and making decisions about your care? And then HIPAA waiver. If you do have a large family, you've got multiple children, et cetera, you should consider healthcare proxy should be sort of one person that's the point person. But you may want other people to be a part of the discussion or to kind of fully understand why decisions are being made. On a HIPAA waiver, you can say, give my medical records, give access to my medical records to all of these people that I list here. That way, those people can indeed be a part of the discussion. And I mentioned beneficiary designation forms as well. That's incredibly important. Avoiding probate, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but with a will must go through probate. A trust does not go through probate. And so if avoiding probate is a concern for you, whether it's to try to streamline things or costs, whatever the time costs, whatever the circumstances may be, I think it's worth a consideration of what, given the assets that you have, given the goals that you have, which is the better disposition document for you. So that's something to talk to an estate planning attorney about. Organizing, we talked about this a little bit, but it should not be a guessing game. Whoever you're going to put in charge of your estate or going to name your power of attorney, going to name your healthcare proxy, should know, where do I get access to that information? How do I access it? So if you've got it in a fire safe with a code, what's that code? Make sure they know what that code is. And then beyond that, if there's any additional sort of wishes that you have, try to document them as best as you can as well. So this kind of matrix here kind of shows all of the potential professionals that you definitely should have in your life. So a financial advisor, especially for people that are considering moving into Kindle, you should have a financial advisor. You should have somebody that is a tax advisor, oftentimes a CPA, an estate planning attorney, as you look at that wealth transfer and you look to solidify what would happen should you become incapacitated. Insurance agent, talked about that. It's really important for you to have high limits on your insurance should an accident occur. At the bank as well, right? Because we have cash flow needs, ensuring that you have a great relationship with a banker as well. And then, if there's other professionals, other pieces of your life, but these people should be talking. They should know that each other exists. They should have the contact information for each other. That way, if a situation does arise, they can be in contact with each other, even behind the scenes in that conversation. So, you want to talk with your family, you want to talk with your financial advisor, you want to talk with your attorney and CPA. That's sort of the triangle that should be involved in all of this. And then finally, updating and maintaining it. I think the number one referral source I have are old wills. So people will come to me and say, hey, I did a will. My kids were 5 years old, 5 and 7. We just got something on paper in case something happens. Now we're 65. Those kids are, well past graduating college. We want to update things, right? That's something that you should be doing. And really, I like to say that like an estate plan needs to be looked at every 10 years at a minimum, but it's really around major events. So, if a new grandchild is born or an injury occurs, a diagnosis is given, whatever the circumstances may be. But when there's been sort of a big life event, that's a good time to at least look at the estate plan again and make sure that it still makes sense for now, this new reality that you have. And finally, those conversations obviously are not easy, right? And that's why including advisors in this process can be very helpful. As Dan says, one of the big parts of his job and parts of my job is having multi-generational conversations about wealth and about roles, right? And so it's just very important to have these conversations with your advisors and with your family. So how do you get in touch with Dan and I? So our information is there. If you are looking for a financial advisor, Dan can speak to his capabilities. I'll just speak really quickly, but I have many clients, share a lot of clients with Dan, and he's absolutely fantastic. But for me, how I can help folks is helping people avoid probate, avoid estate taxes, establishing those documents like power of attorney and healthcare proxy that are relevant while you're alive, and especially if you're moving into a community like Kendall. You can see my contact information there. Big factor for me is I do night appointments, I do weekend appointments. I can obviously do things via Zoom, but I also offer house calls to my clients as well. So if you're local, happy to meet with you kind of where you are and where you're most comfortable, and obviously where your family knows where to go as well as we have these multi-generational conversations. So Dan, I'll kick it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kylan. And a lot, I'm not going to discount it, a lot of information, but all good, all relevant. As Kylan said, I've worked with him on a number of different cases, some less complex than others, I would say. But ultimately, my role and what I do with most is facilitating the process, and ultimately, whether it's just beginning and waking up one day and saying, "Ooh, I got to figure this out now," or something that's long established that you think could use a fresh set of eyes. So, and then ultimately, again, working in collaboration with the professionals. We had a really good slide there of everybody from financial advisor to attorney to, insurance, real estate, you name it, CPAs, a lot of different professionals out there that, usually we try to quarterback and collaborate with. So with that, again, I think today's conversation is a great start towards that wealth transfer, wealth with intention strategy, and ultimately bringing it back to your values and ultimate goals.